This is Town Crier, dedicated to bringing you current news and events from Keene, Swansea, and Marlboro.
Our guest this evening, we're very lucky to have our Dick Berry, who was formerly a chairman of the planning board and is on the committee that has been established to look at the land use and the future of the area, really from Marlboro Street down to Baker Street and the redevelopment of that area. And with Dick tonight is Michelle Chalice, who's the Assistant Planning Director for the City of Keene. Welcome. We're thrilled to have you here.
Thanks. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about what's going on down on Marlboro Street.
Would you like to start?
Well, sure. The city formed an ad hoc committee to look at that area down there, and also hired a consultant to work with the committee. And we've been doing this for, about a year now? And we've had several meetings with the public and solicited their input. And we've got the final report this month, and it's a pretty good looking report, in my opinion. So now, specifically, it talks about creating a new streetscape along Marlboro Street, because that's sort of the anchor for the whole neighborhood. But it also addresses things like trying to help the residential areas to preserve them, and because there's been some conversions down there into apartments and a lot of absentee landlords down there. So there's sort of, the plan addresses some of that stuff. And then, of course, there's the flooding issue, which is another little thing that we need to deal with somehow. The plan does talk about that a little bit. And then it talks about sort of helping out the business area over on Victoria Street by creating a link directly to Marlboro Street instead of having to go out through Water Street using Victoria Street like it does now. What else? There's lots of other things, but I think that's sort of the main flavor of it.
As I understand it, what the plan is really creating is a very mixed-use area. You know, traditional zoning is you put your residences here, you put your businesses over here, you put your industry over here, and everybody has their own distinct little area of the city. This is looking at it very differently, as I understand it.
This is looking at making it easier for Keene to have some of the dynamic types of developments that are happening elsewhere in the country, where housing is mixed, live-work, where you have the ability to live very close to where you work, have that area be very close to where you do your business, have that area be very close to the park where you walk your dogs and you play with your kids. And so, in particular, the project is actually focused. We've done a good job of looking at all these other issues. The project is actually a zoning project. It's looking at rezoning that entire area to find ways to have it be much more dynamic and have it respond to the economy in ways that facilitate redevelopment, that strengthen the community as a whole, foster the types of businesses that we'd like to have more of here in Keene, and be a reflection of the outgrowth of our very successful downtown.
Now, if I, just hearing this, and I'm sitting at home watching this right now, it sounds exciting. It sounds like it could actually transform that whole neighborhood. And that neighborhood has been struggling for a period of time now, and a lot of that has to do with what you said, with conversions of housing to multiple use housing and Keene State kids and others living down there, and what used to be neighborhoods is now, housing for college or whatever it may be. But what is it? When you say the mixed use, can you go in a little bit more into detail what that means? I mean, if first of all, is the zoning right now a mix of residential and industrial,
I'll be happy to clarify that for you. The challenge for us is managing those public expectations, because zoning has to do with what happens into the future. The city at no point has the ability to go to the landowners that live there and say, oh, we changed our mind.
Yeah.
We want to put something else here where you live, where you have your business, where you recreate. Zoning looks at future uses, and right now, the our former industrial Kingsbury property is in an area that was zoned industrial.
Right.
Period. Industrial. Right across the street is zoned residential. So what the project right now proposes to do, and what the report states, and what the draft zoning regulation, which is what the city committees will be looking at over the next year, spelling out in terms of details, is mixing those uses. Industrial, we would like for industrial to still be possible there, but in a different form, in a form that responds more to future industrial, or the types of industrials that are happening right now, much more technology-based, much smaller, much more concise per se, less sprawling, less environmentally damaging, mixed with businesses, mixed with the places where the people who may live or own those businesses may want to have lunch, may want to go out to a performance. The ability to have all those folks who, Timken and all of the folks who are down on Optical Avenue, wouldn't it be fabulous to have a neighborhood where they got a new job there and said, wow, this is where we want to live. We don't want to live outside town. We want to live right on Marlboro Street in this neighborhood because it has everything that we want, what our family wants. We want to be able to walk our kids to school. We want to be able to do everything right here and not spend all of our time in the car.
Of, what you're talking about is sort of going back in history. Because wasn't Colby Street in that area?
Was that you came up with that term, or Chuck, going back to the future?
Yeah.
It's
because I mean, if you think about Colby Street in that area, those were built for a lot of reasons, but a lot of it had to do with the industrial development down in that area.
Yeah, right. International Narrow Fabric was down there. A.E. Martell's was down there.
Right.
Markham's was down there. I mean, there were a lot of industries there that the area you're talking about, the Colby Street area, really developed around those. Couple of things that I'd like to have you talk a little bit about. First off, Marlboro Street is a real asset for the city. It's a very underutilized asset, but it's a real asset. It's the second widest street in the city. It really connects the industries on Optical Avenue with downtown. And it's really been underutilized for the past 30 to 40 years. Secondly, with the ice arena now being proposed at 350 Marlboro Street, where the Public Works garage is and the police station is, and with the industries that are already there, small businesses that support the ice arena and support those businesses should be allowed to prosper and locate there and grow. Everything from restaurants to sporting goods stores to the types of things but also the types of businesses that will support the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
Right. You're exactly right. The way this is proposed is that there's like 3 different zones down Marlboro Street. In the first half, closest to Main Street, is sort of a continuation of the Main Street zoning, like the Central Business District. And then you get into the innovative
zone.
Yeah, the innovative zone. And then
Innovative development zone.
Yeah, development. And then beyond that, it's sort of a mixed use kind of a thing. And then, of course, it's the fact that the city has sort of the anchor at the other end of Marlboro Street is going to be a big help, and that's going to really add a lot to that area down there, I think. But the zoning is such that you could do what you're talking about.
The catch is that these changes will happen incrementally over time, and that's where it gets challenging. Shifting our former mindset of allowing development to happen all of the parking out in front of a business used to work for us. But in the places that are the most vibrant, where people want to spend time, where people want to walk, where people want to bike, where people want to be able to get right out of their car and go into a business, we're learning that the parking needs to be behind those businesses. So that streetway can have vibrancy to it, can have little cafes there, can have landscaping there, so that it is visually appealing. Right now, Marlboro Street is not very visually appealing, as we all know.
I mean, we all look at Main Street, and Main Street is very appealing visually. And I mean, I realize it's controversial, but the city's looking at creating a historic district primarily to maintain that visual appearance and that texture on Main Street. Creating a similar type of texture on Marlboro Street would be very desirable.
Exactly.
It is a major entrance into the community as you come in from the east on
Absolutely.
101 and Optical Avenue, and you come up Marlboro Street. So and quite frankly, that would substantially enhance the property values along Marlboro
absolutely.
Street and make it a much more desirable place for some types of businesses and people to live, to locate.
Absolutely. But think of it. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you wouldn't, the way the zoning is set up is you wouldn't see what you see on the lower part of Main Street between the roundabout and the bypass, which is the college and the historic homes and so on. It would be more of a, as you went around, first started up Marlboro Street from Main, it would be more Main Street kind of a thing.
That's a really good way to describe it.
And then, it would morph into this innovative zone, which we're not quite sure what that's going to look like, but it's
What do you mean by innovative zone?
It's a tricky notion. It's the notion that you're mixing uses in a way that has not happened frequently before. We have an image in particular that is used that shows a building with various levels that has a very nice seating area out in front. That could be an entrance to a housing complex. It could also be an entrance to a startup company. And it is situated along a green space. The notion is that you would potentially have an incubator location we would love to partner with the college to have an incubator area for business students to be able to come and give guidance to businesses within the community, an incubator area for the creative students at the college to be able to sell their wares or look at new technologies to do the types of creations they would like. What would be another way to communicate that?
You could think of it like maybe somebody had a bakery, small bakery, and they lived upstairs.
That's another way to think about it.
They had a bakery downstairs, or
like the bread shed.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's that keeps growing and growing. But
the
I get
idea is, But the idea is to where in the industrial zone, you can't do that kind of stuff. So with this type of zoning, you have a lot more flexibility to.
But you're also talking.
Uses.
You're also talking about going back to the future because if you go into some places in New York City or in Boston, you'll see that the bakeries are right there, and then upstairs is where the owner is of the bakery, and then next door is an antique thing, and up there is it's the same thing. That's
one of the strong attributes of this area that in some ways makes it all possible is that there is a fairly substantial amount of vacant land along Marlboro Street, of underutilized land, where Kingsbury's was, where David Ford was, so there are. In some ways, you're looking at a blank slate, and becomes a question of what do you put on that blank slate?
Yeah, that's another interesting situation because you got Beaver Brook running sort of down the middle of that, and this is just my opinion, but I think the city needs to hire somebody to take a look at that flooding situation and do a fairly complete analysis of the brook and see if we can come up with some good ideas on how to control things down there.
Well, we've talked to the Corps of Engineers about coming in and doing that, And as far as the Kingsbury's property, there's about 5 acres that we would like to acquire for the city, really for flood storage. Also, there's a portion of one of the buildings that's built into the brook that we would like to remove because it has an impact on the capacity of the brook. It's not because that specific thing causes the flooding, but it does have an impact on the capacity of the brook to handle the flow of water during a flood event.
Right, and the report goes so far as to talk about the bridges that go over the brook,
which are too
Marlboro
narrow.
Street, Water Street, Roxbury Street, Church Street, you know,
right.
all the way through.
Brook Street.
Baker Street, which are not big enough for the larger flood events that we've been having lately.
Do you mean the 100-year floods that come every 5 years?
Yeah, pretty much.
Sometimes two.
That's why some of us like to live up on a hill.
I know.
That's what I
How bad are the flood issues once you get past Grove Street? Is there other areas on the other side of
Well,
Marlboro
Baker
Street?
Street.
Baker Street has issues too?
I believe.
Well, Baker Street has always been underwater. I mean, I grew up down in that neighborhood. Before the bypass was put in, before 101 was put in, off Baker Street, it was all a big field. And that was used primarily for flood storage.
Okay.
So that we had a flood event, the water would pond into that field and be able to be absorbed into the soil down there, and it happened every single spring. We could be guaranteed that every spring that area was going to flood. Once the bypass was put in, that field all of a sudden was no longer available for flood storage. So we have issues where the culverts under Route 101 are probably inadequate. They appear to be inadequate. And the flood water backs up into Baker Street, and properties that get flooded on Baker Street primarily because there is no storage capacity in the field anymore. So we do have a problem that we don't have an easy solution for down in the Baker Street area.
Is it fair to say that my impression from the ad hoc committee, and I'm simply the facilitator of the staff, is that the wish of the ad hoc committee is that these two issues will be handled in tandem, that the amount of stormwater management that can happen, that can help to alleviate the flooding, will never be completely free of the flooding.
Eliminate it, but
could happen in concert with the types of developments that we'd like to see into the future, and that Beaver Brook is a crucial, very important and potentially fabulous opportunity to be able to marry those two.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But we really need to do what we can to address that flooding issue, because if it's going to be a regular event, people aren't going to want to build in the flood
Which
zone.
is the
Right.
50th time
You know.
he has said this. He has been our mentor on this statement to constantly remind us that the business interest is huge. There have to be viable businesses in there for this to work. The challenge
absolutely.
for me in the zoning department is this notion of incremental change. How do we set this vision of what this Marlboro Street could look like, and maybe using Main Street as that image could help folks to understand that it's going to be all right to move the parking that they used to have in front of their business, sidewalk, street, behind their business. That we wouldn't think of putting parking in front of one of the banks or brew bakers, or we wouldn't think of doing that. And this is a similar situation where we need that vibrancy right at the street to have this change happen. But for the individual property owners who are going to be taking their new ideas on these clean slates to planning board, it may be a little bit challenging to think about it differently.
Well, it is, and the planning board has already begun to challenge property. We've had a couple of site plans now that have come before the planning board on Marlboro Street within this area, and the planning board has challenged them. They've challenged them about the streetscape. They've challenged them about the parking. Clearly, because they are when you're dealing with the existing businesses. You have to be much more flexible than you would be with a brand new business in a totally vacant lot. But certainly with the existing businesses, we need to, everybody needs to adjust to the fact that we are making incremental changes, and the way that we have looked at these in the past may not be the way that we are going to be looking at them in the future.
I'm wishing for an image, a visual that we can show at each one of those meetings as to what this could look like in the future versus what it looks like now, to
What's the model you
inspire
work-
that change instead of having to just crack down.
What's the model you're working off? What city out there is doing similar work out there that people could, I mean, you say a model's nice, but if there's
Simsbury, Connecticut, you and I have spoken about Simsbury, Connecticut, has been integrating stormwater management with their new development in some fabulous ways, and maybe that's an idea, is to go and get some images of what they're creating. This mixed-use development, this notion of mixing different types of uses within particular areas, and what effect that can have on a streetscape would be a great way to have that happen. Boston, I understand, has an area along one of the rivers that has been doing quite a bit of rework, mixing uses, and I don't remember exactly the name of that one. I should have brought it with.
Charles River, maybe.
Maybe.
That'd be a good guess, huh?
Yeah.
Fenway.
Yeah.
So,
But I think that's a good idea, Chris.
I think in the report, or at least during some of the sessions, the consultants actually showed examples of different cities where some of this stuff had been done. So, and they have some illustrations in the report, and it really is, it's nice, it's, if you look at it, and you say, boy, if we could do this, it would really dress up that area.
yeah, I mean, I know this is looking down the road, and I know there's still a lot of things to talk about, in steps to go through, but would it be a tax finance district, or would it? I mean, would it be?
It could be an tax increment financing district, particularly when we talk about Victoria Street and the possibility of extending Victoria Street over to Marlboro Street. That's a project that ultimately depends on how the Kingsbury property, which is about 22 acres, will be developed. Something we don't know yet. But
is there a real desire to develop that?
The Kingsbury property?
Yeah, with the I mean.
I think the current owner has a real desire to see that property developed, because he really doesn't want to have to give the city $600,000 for back taxes. He would like to see a development proposal come along that will then pay that tax bill. I think that the owner of that property runs a risk that in fact, if nothing happens with that property, and he does not want to pay the $600,000, that we will take it for non-payment of taxes. So I mean, that's a real desire on his part. I know there has been some interest. I know that there have been companies that have looked at that and considered. We had a German company that was here that looked at that site, possibility of 300 jobs. I think they were concerned about the flooding, and haven't heard from them recently. But there is certainly interest in that site.
Okay.
But the development of that site is really going to control what we do with Victoria Street. Victoria Street has been something that has been considered for a long period of time, primarily because there's some trucking companies on Victoria Street. There are some industries on Victoria Street that use tractor-trailer trucks. Right now, those tractor-trailer trucks have to go down Water Street. That means that all of the residences on Water Street have those tractor-trailer trucks going past their house several times a day, and both during the daytime and at night. If we were able to extend Victoria Street, those tractor-trailer trucks could be able to get direct access to Optical Avenue, and in fact would not have to go through those residential neighborhoods.
Or Grove Street, for that matter.
So there is an incentive on everybody's part to have something happen down there.
Okay, and so then what are the next steps then? What are you seeing are clearly the next steps that this group is moving forward with?
Right now, the report itself is being reviewed internally. The report is a documentation of the project as a whole this last year. And April 1st, the community will have the opportunity to see that report as a presentation, and also the draft zoning ordinance. We'll take comments from them for 3 weeks. You may remember that this fall we had a 3-week period or a 4-week period where the public had the opportunity to comment on all 4 aspects of the project. There was a station in the co-op and the new co-op in town, as well as in City Hall, where folks had the opportunity to look at the various images that were available and give us comments. We have those comments. The staff is taking a look at those as we speak. So the community will take a look at the project as a whole, and then City Council will take a look at that project as a whole. From that point, then that draft ordinance will begin to make its way through the various committees to look at the details. What do the details actually specify out? And that's when life will get interesting. We have zoning things that will have to change. We will have planning board aspects that will have to change. And it'll make its way, begin to filter its way down through those committees until they're finally put in a form that the community can agree with and agree upon. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And there's another aspect to this too that is incredibly vital. Is that this is really the lead-in to a larger project.
Right. Yeah.
And how people respond to this, how the implementation goes, how we are able to get the word out is really going to become a model for a much larger project. And perhaps you want to touch on the much larger project that the city's going to be undertaking.
The much larger project is the rezoning of the entire city. And that's been a project that's been in the works for a long time. The city as a whole still has the same zoning that it's had since the 50s, if I'm not mistaken.
1976 was the
some
last
revisions?
major overhaul to the zoning ordinance.
And zoning has changed quite a bit since then. We have an economy right now that needs to have the ability for us as a municipality to move in the most efficient manner possible in terms of considering what the impacts of a future development would be. And we want to make sure that our community has the best set of regulations to allow for that balanced consideration to be done in a very timely manner with true consideration for the broad possibility of impacts throughout the city. That's a big challenge. And so this is one small piece where we're beginning to look at that range of issues in order to prepare ourselves for that broader. Is that a good way to...
Does it help that we have some core buildings already in place, that you have the Savings Bank of Walpole, you have the city at the other end, you have the school, Wheelock School in the middle, and so that you have some building blocks to start with?
PC Connection,
so.
It's huge.
Yeah, because, well,
Yeah.
but it's not. Well, I suppose you could argue, well, if it was, if there was nothing there, you could start with a blank slate. But we went through urban renewal back in the 60s, didn't we? That didn't work.
And that was a disaster.
Didn't work out very well, did it?
We'd rather not go back there again.
Right. So yeah, it's good to have the buildings, successful buildings there, and you can build on that. And
the school is huge. That's a huge issue.
So you build off. Those are some of your building
and the
blocks.
municipal campus itself.
Right.
The vitality that could come.
Yeah, I was just going to go ahead. I wanted to comment on the school.
Yeah.
Because Chris is on the school board.
Yes.
And they were talking about closing Wheelock School.
But we didn't.
No, you didn't.
But you didn't.
And one of the things that ought to be remembered about that is the school serves as sort of a meeting place for the neighborhood.
That's an
It's
anchor.
where people get to know one another, because they bring their and so on. And it's very important to creating that neighborhood
Ambiance.
Yeah, and just getting people to know one another so that there's this feeling of ownership or togetherness, or and I know they do have a neighborhood association down there, but the schools really play a key part in that kind of activity. So it's in that area. I think about 50% of the buildings are residences, out of 550 buildings down there, half of them are where people live. So, so,
They're
you know,
important.
to sum it up, the school is really an important part of a neighborhood.
HCS as well.
Right, I was just thinking that is they have that, and there's also some other buildings down there that can help too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How do you, as you move forward, then do you look for also for grants?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we just submitted a letter of intent. I hope I'm not letting any cats out of the bag, but Court Blomquist, the Public Works Director, and I were looking at a green infrastructure grant that would allow the city to obtain 40,000, I forget exactly what the amount was, but to help the city figure out how green infrastructure could begin to address the stormwater management issue, which is related to the flooding, within that Beaver Creek watershed. That was just submitted the other day. We'll hear back whether we actually get to write that grant. Grants are a huge part of that.
Yeah, actually, this the money for the consultants came from a grant, I believe.
As well,
did
for
it
New
not?
Hampshire Housing, looking at
for this
progressive
project.
zoning
So,
for enhancing communities. So,
yeah.
key figure.
Okay.
When you mention progressive zoning, that brings to mind and I'm not sure that it's been released yet, but the community master plan, the comprehensive master plan, just got a write-up that you might want to highlight.
Yeah, actually, we were commended for, was it the environmental aspect of our 2010
Well, it
community
was
master
really
plan.
for bringing all the aspects of together and how we combine both the economic vitality as well as the environmental issues into a related document to create basically a whole city concept.
That
Yeah.
is resilient, that looks at change over time. And we should mention here as well the joint committee meetings that are happening on a monthly basis that are highlighting the types of projects that are happening within the city that support some of the really exciting aspects of the master plan.
Well, I want to thank you guys, and what I hope to do is have you on, again, so that as we're moving forward, we can keep the community aware of what steps we're doing next and how we're moving forward. But it's exciting, it's needed, and I thank you.
Yeah, and it really is. It's the direction that the city and the city government are headed in the future as we work to make the city attractive, as we work to make the city a desirable place for people to live and to work, as we try to make it more conducive to families with children to locate here. That this is part of that work that the city is engaged in, and it's how do we make this community a community for the 21st century where people want to be.
Right.
Yeah.
So, again, thank you very much, and
welcome.
we'll have you on again.